What's happening in Sequoia is what's going to happen across China is you're going to have to pick a side.
Mm.
You want China or do you want the world, right? And so what happened with Sequoia and a couple of other funds, they decided you just kind of you just can't function anymore. And so the investors that have that appetite for the political risk can still put their money into Sequoia. Now, as a separate thing, Hong Shan now raised a ton of money with it 2, 3 years ago now, and there's no place to put that money in China, right? So they're looking globally as well. So it becomes even more complicated. But yeah, that political pressure is intense. And I think also the calculation is that going into an election year, it's not, it'll get worse before it gets better. I mean, I'm a long-term believer in that China-US ties will eventually simmer down. There's too much at stake. There's too much of a cooperation and a symbiosis and mutual benefit, right? Like for the relationship to be completely severed. However, there's a lot of space where I think they went too far, right? Like gutting all of your manufacturing might not be the wisest choice, right? There is some logic to, you know, onshoring or reshoring or whatever, diversifying your supply base. There's also some logic from the Chinese perspective to not be reliant on foreign capital for your domestic superstars, right? I've always made this joke that like the equivalent of Alibaba listing in New York is kind of as if Google listed in Russia and Americans couldn't buy rubles, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's like a fundamental contradiction. To be a Hegelian about it or Marxist, it's a contradiction that has to be resolved, right? Like, and I think some of what's happening now is that like some of these inherent contradictions are finally being resolved, and not necessarily the smoothest way, but sort of almost an inevitability that like capital markets, there's some realignment that was overdue, I think. However, there's also going to be, I think, an extreme in the other direction, right? It's a pendulum. But I think everyone's making a calculation that at least for the next year with the elections, China is going to be a sensitive thing for people to do. And so, and furthering that, so it's like you're an investor, you're looking at like, okay, where can you put your money to work? Well, China's going to make me get, target of nasty tweets or worse, get hauled in for, some congressional hearings. And then what are my returns going to be? That's the issue. Like people will stomach a lot of negative press if at least I'll get rich in the process or makes crazy returns. What's happened is that the China returns have not been amazing. And even if you have amazing paper returns, you can't get your money out, right? So an example would be ByteDance. At one point valued at 400 billion, I think when Tiger came in. At the latest that I remember reported now, the company's employee share buyback program is 220 billion, something around the 200 billion
Yep.
plus range. So if you're Tiger, okay, maybe you can cost average down and, buy more shares. And so that overall the price isn't too bad. But the thing is, you have no visibility on when that thing's going to list. No visibility. Not only do you have a question of like, will it even survive in the US, which I think it will, but like, what will the SEC demand of it in order to list? Setting aside the whole question of China, what are the Chinese regulators going to demand for this thing to list? Will they even allow it to list? They have no incentive to list, right? So much money is locked into that. And the Chinese economy seems to just be like on kind of life support. So the risks reward don't make sense, I think. And so that's part of the impetus for these sorts of decoupling in the investor world.